Big question of the day, though, is what does Sir Keir Starmer have to do to win your trust? Folks, we're stuck with him, aren't we? For at least, I guess, 4 more years or so. He seems to think he's going to be there for 10 years. Most of his plans seem to be pretty long-term, but I don't think he should get too comfortable yet. But is it our duty now to try and get comfortable with him? And what might he say or do to make us feel that way? I don't know whether one can be reassured by this, but a friend of mine did say to me, often when you have a Labour government, they have the capacity to do more right-wing things than a Conservative government. They don't tend to face as much opposition from the swamp or from NGOs or charities, all of those people who love to Tory bash. So could we actually see a Labour Party that does reform the NHS, that does actually do something significant about controlling inward migration? Sir Keir Starmer went over to meet the wonderful Giorgia Meloni in Italy, who's cut inward migration, illegal migration to Italy, by 60%. So she must be doing something right. Once upon a time, he called her far right. Now I think he seems that she's just right. So perhaps he might be able to take a leaf out of her book. I'm joined today, and hopefully for the whole 3 hours, by a good friend of mine, and I suppose former colleague, Mr. Ben Habib.
Well, we're still colleagues in a sense, aren't we?
We're something. We'll always be something, Ben. Let's talk, first of all, about the Labour Party conference. I don't know what sort of bits you've picked up on it so far, but...
Thankfully, I haven't picked up anything on it.
We've got a mic issue today. Your mic's fallen off, my mic had fallen off. We're putting old Tech Op Dave through his paces today. Got people crawling around on hands and knees in the studios, wiring people up. What am I supposed to do? Just do a freestyle rap? Thankfully, no one has to actually listen to that, because instead we can listen to Angela Rayner kicking off the Labour Party conference this morning, doing what Labour does best, pushing everything they have done wrong to the side and slamming the Tories. Let's have a listen.
Don't forget what they did. Partygate, COVID contracts, the lies, division, scapegoating and the unfunded tax cuts for the richest that crashed our economy. Don't forget any of it. The Tories failed Britain and they tried to cover it up. A crater in the heart of Britain's economy, a puncher in the pocket of every working family, and a £22 billion black hole.
God.
Well, there you go. Angela Rayner selling us a story of hope, a vision for the future, a plan for economic growth, blueprints for how she's going to build millions of houses needed to meet the level of inward migration. Apparently, it's not just us, Ben, who are not particularly happy with the Prime Minister. Apparently, a source has told The Telegraph that they want rid of Sue Gray, but also there's plenty of people, especially on the backbench of the Labour Party, who might already want rid of Sir Keir Starmer.
I mean, it's been a remarkable few weeks in office, hasn't it? You know, we've seen national debt break that 100% of GDP boundary, in large part because of spending pledges made by the Prime Minister, spending pledges that he's made having claimed that there's a £22 billion black hole and having taken back winter fuel benefits from the elderly. So this is a man who is simply out of control. He's rewarded the unions. He hasn't enforced our borders. He's bringing in all sorts of changes to employment law, to diversity, equity and inclusion, making that even more rigid, giving the Office of Budget Responsibility legislative standing in the United Kingdom, stripping the Chancellor of the ability to make policy decisions. This is a man who is, as I say, out of control. And
let's unpick some of those things. So, First of all, the £22 billion black hole. What I do know is the Financial Times went to the Treasury and said, OK, show us the figures, show us the maths behind this. When people said it wasn't there and then you say it is, how did you calculate that? And they put it under a freedom of information. And the Treasury replied, as far as we're saying, oh, we don't have the sums.
Yeah,
what we
they declined to answer.
They declined to answer. What we do know is at least 9.2 billion could potentially be as a result of Labour's own policies, which is giving those public sector pay rises to their buddies in the union, and the increasing cost of asylum seekers or migrants. What do you make of this 22 billion black hole? Do you think it was there? Do you think the Conservatives really did leave the economy in such a dire state that Sir Keir Starmer has every right to talk about doom and gloom? Or is this some sort of play, do you think, so he can go about wielding socialist extreme policies and using all of our money to do it?
The national debt is over £2 trillion now. 22 billion is a rounding error in the total national debt. 22 billion, if there is such a thing as a black hole, and I would argue there isn't, because with government spending, it's all about choices. It's not a matter of identifying whether or not there's a specific hole that needs plugging. It's whether or not the overall figure, the overall debt as a proportion of GDP, is manageable. And I would say that our debt levels have been unmanageably high for ever since Labour were last in office, frankly. We haven't got national debt under control. It's not about 22 billion. It's about making decisions about how to spend that which you do have and which you are able to spend. The government has a budget of about 800 billion to a trillion, roughly. And that's a very big budget, right? 22 billion is a rounding error even in that overall budget that it has to spend. What it shouldn't be doing is spending £6 billion a year on housing illegal migrants. What it shouldn't be doing is spending £11 billion on foreign climate change projects. What it perhaps should consider more carefully is spending £3 to $5 billion a year on the Ukrainian war. What it should be perhaps considering more carefully is whether or not it should continue to pay £35 billion a year to the banks on the cash that was created for the banks in order to rescue them from their indulgences over decades. There are so many spending areas where they could cut back and right the imbalances to which they refer that they haven't done. It is about choices, and what they've chosen to do is to reward the unions, to go full tilt on this ridiculous net zero climate change nonsense, and not to enforce our borders. And not enforcing your borders has a direct hit on the back pocket of the Exchequer.
I want to talk to you about something you said earlier, which is giving the OBR, the Office for Budget Responsibilities, more powers. And it's occurred to me, when you look at this and what he laid out in the King's speech, was not just giving the OBR more powers and legislative powers, but essentially creating a whole new quangocracy. I think there are 11 new bureaus that he set up.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that what he intends to do via these bureaus is probably to fill them with his own people, like-minded, strip away any ability of a future government to reverse it, because power has essentially then been bled out away from the democratic instruments that they should be in, so we can say, right, we don't agree with your policy, let's get rid of you, and into a structure that's going to become a Gordian knot of socialism.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. I mean, he is taking a leaf out of Tony Blair's. Tony Blair started this move towards quangocracies, and the first move, if you like, in that direction was the so-called independence of the Bank of England. Do you remember when it was given the mandate to control inflation, keep it below 2% per annum? And he justified that, saying he wanted to take political interference out of monetary policy. But monetary policy is one of two arms that any government has to manage the economy. You know, there's fiscal policy and there's monetary policy. And he stripped that away from political scrutiny. And it was the beginning. And we all kind of bought it. We all thought, oh, well, that kind of makes sense.
Oh, that sounds nice. Yeah, governments can't make us go bankrupt anymore. There's going to be sensible people with, you know, bifocals and grey hair who know what they're doing and checking their homework and saying, don't do this, that'd be a bad idea.
But he justified it on that basis. And then Ofcom was created, and that was given extraordinary powers. The Conservatives said that they would pare back Ofcom's powers. Actually, David Cameron made it even more powerful. The OBR was one of George Osborne's creation, the Office of Budget Responsibility, and it's now being given legislative...
Funny, that one of the most least responsible chancellors we've ever had.
George Osborne,
yeah.
absolutely awful man. I mean, he was basically taking socialist policies through a Conservative government. The opportunity that we really had to reverse all the damage that Tony Blair did was when David Cameron came to office. And Cameron, true to his... to the caption that people gave him, you know, the heir to Blair. He was the heir to Blair.
Yeah,
Nothing changed. Everything continued. And Starmer's doing the same. You're right. He's creating more quangocracies. He's empowering them. He's putting his own people in them. And that makes them unaccountable. It makes them subject to no controls from political scrutiny. And therefore they can go on and do whatever it is they wish to do.
No controls to political scrutiny. But what we do learn is once you create an institution or an entity that makes decisions on things, it has this compelling factor of wanting more and more power, like the EU. So when you create these quangocracies, what are they going to do? They're going to come out with policies. They're going to come out with ways to enforce them. They're actually going to want.
Absolutely.
We give them control and they will take more control over our lives.
Absolutely.
I feel like we're sleepwalking towards a sort of CCP right now.
It's the dumbing down of democracy. It's the hijacking of our British democracy so that there's no easy way back. Even if you get a sensible government, there's no easy way back to reversing the agenda. That's precisely what they've been doing.
No, that's my fear as well. And we've only just started. Lord knows what all of these various entities are going to decide over the next 5 years. I reckon we're going to end up with a social credit system where basically, you know, you've got some sort of ID card and they say, oh, well, you've bought a whole milk last week, you better not do that. Oh, is that cigarettes you're trying to buy? Going to end up in prison if you do that.
But can I just say about the OBR? The OBR has been given a kind of religious protection already because no chancellor is allowed to make a decision on fiscal policy without the OBR approving it. It's now going to be a legal requirement for the OBR to sign off on a budget. That means that both fiscal policy and monetary policy in this country are now out of the hands of government.
If I remember, it was the OBR who said that most migration now, low-skilled migration, was not having any net benefit to the economy. In fact, it was a net drain on the economy, in that most people coming into the country now don't have any level of work rate that's higher than our own because they're bringing spouses and children and so on and so forth. So if the good old OBR are going to have so much power and are actually running the country with Sue Gray and not Sir Keir Starmer, perhaps the Labour Party might start listening to that. Do you think they might be a government that, against everyone's expectations, would finally say we've got to bring the number of people coming into the country down?
No, I don't think the Labour Party will ever begin to do it. The Labour Party doesn't identify itself as being British. I know that's going to be offensive to some people listening to this programme, but they don't. The Labour Party Keir Starmer sees himself as a globalist. He sees global prosperity as the aim, and actually we're just one component of delivering that prosperity. And the minute you cease to believe in that which is the United Kingdom, immigration becomes a non-issue. Because, frankly, you're serving the people of the world. He was elected by the British people, but he doesn't serve the British people.
Right. Yeah, and very few British people actually voted for him. Let's talk about the story that just won't go anywhere, which is the latest reports today. God, there's just so many of them. So the Labour Cabinet, has accepted more than £800,000 in donations and freebies this year. I mean, that's just mad. David Lammy has received the most, having accepted £150,000 worth, including £2,500 tickets to go see Tottenham Hotspur, the use of a hospitality box. There's been photos, actually, of Starmer, Sue Gray, Lammy, all sitting there at hospitality watching the football with a woman who quite has this wonderful idea of getting rid of the Premier League or something, or creating an alternative one. What on earth do they think they're doing? They were the ones who went hell for leather about noses in the trough, about Boris Johnson's wallpaper, about a piece of blimmin' cake in number 10. You know, the most ridiculous reason I've ever heard for a Prime Minister being removed from office. And then here they are, just ridiculous. I mean, Angela Rayner, £104,000 in gifts and donations, including clothing from the ME and EM fashion brand. Why can't these people buy their own clothes? I mean, what is wrong with them?
It is outrageous. And you know, I've got an issue with very rich individuals and corporates donating money to political parties. But at least that's transparent. We can all see exactly what's going on. But when you get personal donations to prime ministers, to deputy prime ministers, chancellors of the exchequers and so on, you're skewing their personal loyalties. And we've already talked about how Keir Starmer, frankly, doesn't stand for the British people. Lord Ali must have huge influence. If Mrs. Starmer loves Lord Ali because she gets wonderful clothes from him, Lord Ali is going to get to Keir Starmer either directly through the donations he makes to Keir Starmer or through his wife. There's going to be a pincer movement.
Like Marie Antoinette.
On government policy, and it's completely wrong.
Listening to the left flail over this is, I mean, look, it's ridiculous, it's disgusting, but what is even more ridiculous and disgusting to the level that it's actually quite delightful and delectable is trying to listen to them justify some of this stuff. So with, you know, having to go to a hospitality box at the football, oh, well, you know, he's the Prime Minister, he's the leader of the opposition, he wouldn't have been safe in the terraces. Not that Rishi Sunak didn't go to Southampton.
Don't go to the footy.
stands.
Watch it on telly.
Well, watch it on telly.
Yeah,
or
like
pay
the
for
rest
your
of
own
us.
security. If it's in your own time and it's not as Prime Minister, sort that out yourself.
Yeah.
And then with the clothes, I've heard people say things like, oh, well, there needs to be a taxpayer budget to dress people in cabinet. You know, clothes are important for the job. Excuse me?
Yeah.
Are you kidding me? I don't think anyone can. I mean, no. Boris Johnson's the one who could most have done with some sort of wardrobe uplift.
Yeah. I mean, they're targeting, you know, there's this...
The way they're scrambling now to justify this stuff. The one I keep hearing is, oh, well, Sir Keir Starmer's not been well advised. You're the Prime Minister. You can make up your own mind about things.
Well, that's what they always say, don't they, when there's a misstep from a senior figure. Well, he hasn't been well advised. They're targeting second jobs, and I think in some respects they may be justified in looking at, you know, extracurricular activity from MPs. But one thing that just should be banned outright is donations of a personal nature to elected, representatives of the British people. It just shouldn't happen. Ban it altogether, and then you can't have this kind of charade. There can be no justification for free clothes. There can be no justification for Angela Rayner. There's a story here that I was reading earlier. It was new to me. I was absolutely horrified. Angela Rayner being given grace and favour flats in Manhattan.
Right.
I mean, how is that advancing the British people?
Letting a little friend Sam Tarry, who was then MP for Ilford South, I think they might have been involved in some way, also go along and stay in this Manhattan apartment, and apparently that escaped her memory.
And that's Lord Ali, again.
I know, it was Lord Ali's everywhere.
He's everywhere.
Lord Ali, where are my clothes? Where's my holiday apartment? I can be left-wing if you want me to.